Welcome, boys and girls. Costin here with a discussion about the future of Total War and the future of Creative Assembly. At the moment, we are waiting for the release of Tides of Torment, which is going to come out, according to CA themselves in their video on the subject, it's going to come out in late October. That's what they're aiming for as a release window. Could be the very last day of October, could be the last week, could be earlier than that, could be later than that. Don't be surprised whatsoever if it comes out in November. I don't really know what's been going on in Creative Assembly, but certainly there appear to have been problems. You don't have these kind of issues if things are just going smoothly. Now, maybe it's people being assigned to different projects within the company because they are working on free titles at the moment, I think. Possibly, potentially based on credible or not so credible information on the subject. One of the things worth pointing out, however, is that a lot of people were fired from Creative Assembly after Hyenas was cancelled, though that makes more sense than you might think, because a lot of those people had probably been hired in the first place to work on Hyenas. If you look at other games that Hyenas was looking to compete with, Fortnite for instance, those kind of games have a lot of developers working on them. So a lot of people were probably hired on that, let go when Hyenas was cancelled. It was a very costly failure. It's one of the biggest disasters in video gaming history alongside things like ET. And then Concord came out. Now, how many people were let go? Hard to say. I've heard figures like 50% of people within the company were let go. Before the triple disaster of SOC, Pharaoh, and Hyenas, they had close to 900 people. Now, the latest and most credible data I could find, though credible in quotation marks right there, is something along the lines of 500 people. So maybe not quite 50%, or maybe a lot more were let go, and then more people were hired to replace those people to work on the stuff that they're currently developing. So what are they working on right now, based on what we can tell? Some of these things are less certain than others, but one of the things we do know for certain is that they are working on Alien Isolation 2. Unclear when that is going to come out. Might be next year, might be longer than that, but they have stated publicly that they are working on Alien Isolation 2. Now, Alien Isolation was a really great game. Great graphics, themes, that horror element, the tension in that game. Seriously, you could cut that tension with a knife. That was real, genuinely scary as a game to a degree. Obviously, once you figure out things in game, how the alien works, how the AI works, and all that, the behavior, it becomes far less tense. Like, you know, the areas that you're actually in danger and the areas you're not so much in danger, and the way you can manipulate that. But it does beg the question, how are they going to maintain that in Alien Isolation 2? How did they build on something that was pretty good, though limited to an extent? Again, great game, amazing game even. But there are obviously some questions on how they're going to handle it in the future with the sequel. I would like to point out something though. If you have the rights to the Alien franchise, and they do, they could genuinely make many other games within the Aliens universe or the Alien universe, like a strategy game. I mean, we've had The Dark Descent come out, pretty solid. I think Creative Assembly could do that. I'm not saying that they are, but I'm just throwing out ideas out there on the subject, like what they could do. We've had, if I'm not mistaken, strategy games. We certainly have had multiple games in that universe of Alien or Aliens coming out. So there's a lot of opportunities with that license. We'll see if they do take advantage of it. It does depend, of course, on the kind of contract they have, the limits, the terms, all that kind of stuff. But if they were to make a strategy game, it could be a testing ground for many different things, in particular gunplay for future projects, or battle gameplay with modern guns for future projects, or, futuristic settings that they might want to tackle, and that they apparently are tackling at the moment. Because as far as Total War is concerned, they are working on 2 titles in Total War. One of them is going to be a historical title, unclear on what the setting is going to be there, but the other one is going to be Warhammer 40K. This has been talked about a lot, but there are clear indications that this is what CA has decided to do. Now, people could talk about Age of Sigmar, they could talk about the Old World. Personally, I think that with respect to Age of Sigmar and Old World, Games Workshop needs to develop those settings more. Like, you're looking at years down the line once they've released more factions over there, when you're looking at Age of Sigmar and Old World, once they've developed more factions, introduced more players, characters, and all that. Yeah, I think an Old World game would make sense. Age of Sigmar, a bit more questionable on that subject. Questionable in the sense that, well, let me put it like this. Age of Sigmar may be popular, but it also has a huge amount of controversy associated with it. And the games in the Age of Sigmar part of it haven't been that great, really. We saw Realms of Ruin coming out, not a fantastic title, or just one that was very lackluster. Had some potential, has some genuine potential, especially on a story level, but just didn't deliver. It was a commercial failure. But why 40K? I mean, forget anything related to gameplay. Developers don't decide to make a project or another dependent on the gameplay ideas or something like that. They decided based on financial reasons. Well, if we look at 40K at the moment, it is in a very popular spot, and it's going to get even more popular across the board. So we have the Amazon series, we have Warhammer Plus, we have Astartes 2, we have Dawn of War 3, we have Mechanicus 2. So I think it is very likely, and actually certain, that they are working on Total War Warhammer 40K, or whatever title they're going to pick. It's going to be a weird title for a game, I gotta say, because Warhammer 40,000, Total War, or Total War Warhammer 40,000, just a really awkward title to spell out in full, so curious about the branding on that. But 40K is in a very, very strong spot right now commercially as an IP. Now, some people will say, well, why would they release a strategy game if they're going to, compete with Dawn of War or potentially some other titles? To which I reply, well, you got Mechanicus 2, and you've got Dawn of War 3, which is also going to have Adeptus Mechanicus. So, Games Workshop apparently does not see an issue with that. And if they don't see an issue with that, I don't think anyone should really see an issue with that. In fact, this could just work to reinforce one product to the next, and that's one of the things that is going to lend strength to the idea that they're working on 40K, because you already have 2 pretty big games in 40K. We'll see how they come out. Mechanics 1 was pretty good. Dawn of War has, some things that it needs to deal with, but a lot of people are excited about Dawn of War 3. And so I think it makes perfect business sense for them as a developer, given their partnership with Games Workshop, to make 40K. From a lot of perspectives. Now, exactly how it would be, what kind of scale we're going to talk about, how the campaign would work out, would we have naval battles, all that kind of stuff. Those are big discussion points, right? And something I'll tackle in the future. Beyond that, what 40K could end up being is kind of a testing ground, or a way for them to handle a space setting well. Because remember, when those rumors first started coming out about Warhammer 40K, we also had the Star Wars rumors. Now, Star Wars was mentioned from the very beginning that it was going to take a while. They're going to do 4K first, then they're going to do Star Wars. They apparently canceled the World War I game. I guess it makes some sense. That kind of period of time, can be tricky to handle it. Bit of a shame, because I think there were certainly some things they could have done in a World War I game that would have worked very well in a 4K game, because there's a lot of trench warfare. I mean, DEFCOR, not DEFCOR. We might get both in a Total War 40K game. But I do expect how they'll handle gameplay, that is the biggest question, especially battles, because people talk about like field battles. Look, I'm gonna say it outright right here. If Total War 40K is just gonna be one army, line up, charge against another, that is not 40K. Like, you can say, oh, but that's how it works on tabletop. No, that's not even how it works on tabletop. I'm gonna be blunt. It doesn't work in Dawn of War 1 or 2 or 3. Sure, you can think about Dawn of War 1, but again, I do think there's a lot more factors that they do need to consider on that subject. But do expect 40K. Now, as far as a historical game goes, we have no idea what they're actually cooking. The most I've heard is that it could be medieval free. Some people have apparently gotten some information on that subject, but we don't know. It could be any setting, though I think Shogun free could make some sense. It is the 25th anniversary of Total War. It started with Shogun 1, so they could very well decide to revisit that time period. And Shogun would give them a lot of opportunities to do more than just Japan, Sengoku Jidai. They could have the invasion of Japan. If I'm not mistaken, Shogun 1 did have Mongols. Yes, pretty certain they did. So they could have the invasion of Japan by the Mongols. They could have the Japanese invasion of Korea. Really, it was meant to be an invasion of China. They just got stuck in Korea, thanks to Admiral Yi, in part. But those kind of things are interesting. So you do have pre-Nobunaga, then you have Nobunaga, then you have Toyotomi, then you have Ieyasu, all those conflicts, all those things. It could very well end up being the game that Three Kingdoms wishes it had been. Like, Three Kingdoms was pretty good in a lot of mechanics and a lot of things it did. One of the things I disliked about it is that you have the Three Kingdoms period, this era rich in characters and history and stories. We know a lot. It's been written in novels. It's been documented, well, as best as it can be documented. But we have so much, and you're not really doing all that much with those characters. And I think that's one of the things Total War doesn't need to do. Sure, sandbox is important, but so are characters when you're looking at history. And I think that's one of the things they really need to tackle in a historical game. There's two ways you can look at it, though. They could do a game focused on antiquity, wherever they decide to put it in, or in the medieval age, if they want to have a contrast to 40K, assuming they're doing 40K, and there's a lot of indications that they are. Never mind the fact that 40K, as I said, is popular, in a popular moment, all that. Also, they could do a game focused on that for an older period of time, like we have a future Total War, we have antiquity or the Middle Ages. So it could be medieval free, could be Shogun free, potentially. Could be another Rome game for all we know. We don't. I don't necessarily think we're gonna get another Rome game, but would be nice. Certainly wouldn't say no to it if they do it properly. And I think Creative Assembly has really improved since then. On the flip side, they could do a game focused on gunpowder warfare, regardless of where they decide to set it in, what kind of time period they're going to use, to double down on the kind of gameplay changes that they're going to introduce, battle changes specifically that I expect them to introduce in a 40K game. So we'll find out about that later on this year. One of the things I hope they avoid with the historical game is what really doomed Pharaoh, beyond gameplay issues, and there were plenty. It got improved in Dynasties, not fully, still more things that needed to be improved in there, but the problem with Pharaoh is that it was covering a period of history that, bluntly, we don't know a lot of stuff about. Sure, we have some names, they use them, but that's kind of it. We really, really don't know much about these people. Like, we know the most about Ramesses, Battle of Kadesh, a lot of it is myth, a lot of it is legend. Look, I'm a big fan of history. I've been to Mycenae, to put it like that. I've been to the Oracle in Greece. I've visited places. I haven't gotten around to Troy yet, but I would love to go there. That's my perspective. But when you're covering history, you want to cover the more documented part of history. Not the most well-known necessarily, but documented. so you get things right, as opposed to making stuff up. Any adaptation is going to make stuff up, that's fair enough, but when you look at something like Arrow, they made a lot of stuff up, and that starts feeling less like history and just more like a fantasy history game, which can work, but we already have fantasy game. Give us a proper historical game and character focused, properly character focused. Because there are many characters in history that were important. Like, I would love to see the rise of the Ottoman Empire. I would like to see the fall of Constantinople. I would like to see the Battle of Nicopolis, for instance, the Hussite Wars, as an example. Joan of Arc, if you will, even. Really, like, when you look at Joan of Arc, she's actually a very impressive figure in history. And thing is, we know a lot about her because a lot was written about her. We actually know more about her than many other events that were happening around the world at the same time that she was alive or shortly after, just because it was documented. So that can that can be very useful. So we'll find out, however, what CA decides to do, how they handle mechanics, battles, etc. That's all I had to say. Costin signing out.